"You're not invited this year, Grandpa. It's just better that way." When Lily said those words, standing in the glow of her 10-foot Christmas tree in that glass-walled Aspen mansion, it felt like someone had dumped a bucket of icy water down my back. For a second, I genuinely thought she was joking. I'd spent decades hosting Christmas for this family. I'd carved turkeys with shaking hands after surgery. I'd strung lights on rooftops when my knees were shot. And now, at 71, I was suddenly an unwanted guest. I stared at my 3 grandchildren, Lily, Ethan, and Noah, sitting around their marble kitchen island like a committee that had already reached its verdict. The scent of cinnamon candles mingled with the faint tang of pine from the massive tree I'd paid for 2 years ago. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily against the mountain night, soft and silent. Inside, my world was cracking. What do you mean I'm not invited?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Ethan avoided my eyes, fiddling with his expensive smartwatch. Lily smoothed the sleeves of her designer sweater like she was preparing for a board meeting. "Grandpa," she said with that forced kindness she used to use on waiters, "it's not personal. It's just that the Prescott family is flying in this year. You know how they are with traditions. They're used to a certain atmosphere." I glanced around the room. Everything, from the floor-to-ceiling windows to the imported Italian light fixtures, had my fingerprints on it. When their parents passed away unexpectedly 10 years ago, I'd taken out loans to keep the family home. I'd sold my woodworking shop to cover their tuition. I'd refinanced my cabin to make sure they'd have the kind of life their parents dreamed of. And now I was apparently too out of place for their holiday dinner. "A certain atmosphere," I repeated slowly. "And what atmosphere is that, Lily?" Her lips tightened. "Grandpa, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Noah, the youngest at 22, shrugged with that careless arrogance only the very privileged can pull off. "They're old money gramps. They like things polished. You know, sophisticated." "Polished," I echoed. My hands were resting on the kitchen island now. The same island I'd commissioned from a local craftsman to support their grandmother's holiday feasts back when the house was alive with laughter. "So I'm too rough for your polished guests?" "Don't take it that way," Lily said quickly. "It's just easier this way." Easier. The word hit harder than any insult. I looked at the 3 of them, the people I'd raised as if they were my own children. I remembered scraped knees, bedtime stories, Christmas mornings, where they'd tear open presents while I watched with coffee in hand and tears in my eyes. I remembered the night Lily was accepted to Columbia, and I nearly emptied my savings account to make it possible. I remembered the countless mortgage payments I'd quietly covered so they could figure things out after college. And now, on a snowy December night in Aspen, I was being erased like chalk from a board. "Well then," I said, forcing my voice into something resembling calm, "tell the Prescotts I wish them a very Merry Christmas." "Grandpa," Ethan started, but I was already walking toward the front door. My boots echoed against the polished hardwood floors I'd paid for. The wreath on the door smelled of fresh pine and eucalyptus, handcrafted by some overpriced boutique Lily adored. I pulled the door open, and the cold mountain air slapped my face like the truth I'd been too blind to see for years. Behind me, their voices overlapped, nervous, guilty, rehearsed. But none of them stopped me. The heavy wooden door closed with a soft thud that sounded a lot like finality. I stood there for a moment on the snow-dusted porch, looking at the lights glittering across the valley below. Aspen was glowing, festive, alive, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't part of it. I climbed into my old pickup, the same one that had hauled Christmas trees and furniture for them more times than I could count, and sat in the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel. A strange calm spread through me. Not sadness, not even anger, something sharper, cleaner, resolution. By the time I reached the end of their long, winding driveway, I'd already decided this Christmas would be different. They thought excluding me was the end of the story. They had no idea it was only the beginning. The drive back to my cabin wound through the dark pine forests that wrapped around Aspen like a heavy winter coat. My truck's headlights cut through the falling snow, catching the occasional deer frozen on the roadside before it darted into the trees. The heater groaned, struggling to keep up with the mountain cold. It used to be a peaceful drive, one I'd made hundreds of times after babysitting, holiday dinners, or late-night emergencies when one of the kids needed help. But that night, the road felt different. Every turn, every pine-shadowed stretch, echoed with a single thought. They'd cut me out without hesitation. I pulled into the driveway of my cabin, a modest two-bedroom place nestled among aspens and evergreens, the same home I'd built with my own hands decades ago. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out, the cold biting through my flannel shirt. The porch light flickered, another repair I'd been putting off while sending money their way. Inside, the house greeted me with its familiar stillness. No laughter, no voices, just the soft tick of the old wall clock above the fireplace. I hung my coat by the door, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the stack of unopened mail in front of me. There were envelopes from the bank, utility bills, insurance notices, the usual reminders of a life lived responsibly. And then, buried in the middle, I found their mail. Mortgage statements, property tax bills, HOA notices for their luxury subdivision on Red Mountain Drive, all redirected here because, for the past 6 years, every month without fail, I'd been covering the difference when they forgot to. I reached for my calculator, the old kind with a roll of paper that whirs when you punch the numbers. I started adding $12,600 a month for their mortgage, and $1,200 for property taxes every quarter, emergency payments here and there when Ethan's investments needed a boost, or when Lily's interior designer sent another surprise invoice. By the time I was done, the total stared back at me like a confession. $183,000. My entire retirement cushion. Gone. I leaned back in my chair. My late wife Helen had warned me. "Tom," she'd said once gently, "you can't keep bailing them out. They'll never learn to stand on their own." I'd brushed her off back then, saying family comes first. I thought sacrifice would earn gratitude. Turns out, it only made me invisible. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Lily. "Grandpa, don't be upset. We'll do something after the holidays. Promise." I stared at that heart emoji for a long time. It felt like a slap. I set the phone face down and opened my laptop. I hadn't logged into my bank's online portal in months, mostly because I didn't want to look too closely. But now, my fingers moved with surprising steadiness. I navigated to the Recurring Transfers tab. There it was, $20,600 monthly. Red Mountain Mortgage, account ending 9083. Status, active. For years, I'd let that automatic transfer run quietly in the background, the lifeline that kept their Aspen fantasy afloat. I clicked cancel. The confirmation box popped up asking, "Are you sure you want to stop this transfer?" I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Transfer canceled successfully. I exhaled, a long breath that seemed to leave with 5 years of quiet resentment. Next, I pulled out a folder I'd tucked away in my desk months earlier, a folder I used to avoid looking at because it made me feel like a fool. Inside were bank statements, property records, receipts, copies of checks with my shaky old signature scrawled at the bottom, a paper trail of generosity, or stupidity, depending on how you looked at it. I laid everything out on the table, sheet by sheet, like evidence in a courtroom, and in a way it was. Evidence of exactly how far I'd gone to keep my family comfortable, while living like a man on borrowed time. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a lonely place. It felt like headquarters. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon from the cabinet, the good stuff I'd been saving for special occasions. I raised it to the empty room. "To new traditions," I muttered, and took a long sip. Outside, snow continued to fall. Christmas lights twinkled faintly through the forest from distant houses where families were gathering. I imagined Lily and the boys laughing over some imported wine, already planning their polished holiday dinner without me. They had no idea the ground beneath them had just shifted. The morning after I cut the financial cord, Aspen woke to one of those postcard-perfect winter scenes. Fresh snow blanketed everything in a thick white layer, muffling sound and making the world look peaceful. Deceptively peaceful. The sun glinted off the slopes, and the air outside my cabin was sharp enough to sting the lungs. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, the way Helen used to make it, and settled into my favorite armchair by the fireplace. For the first time in years, I didn't have a deadline looming over me. No mortgage payment due for someone else's house. No anxious calls about emergencies. Just the crackle of the fire and the soft hiss of the kettle on the stove. At exactly 10:45 a.m., my phone lit up on the side table. Lily. I let it ring twice before answering. "Grandpa!" Her voice was bright, practiced. The same chirpy tone she used when she wanted something. "Good morning. I hope you're staying warm out there in the woods." I swirled my coffee. "Morning, Lily. What's going on?" She skipped the pleasantries. "Listen, I need a little favor. The Prescott's flight is coming in from Chicago this afternoon, and, well, with all the holiday traffic and the airport being a mess, it would be amazing if you could pick them up. Their private shuttle canceled last minute, and you're the only one with a truck big enough for their luggage." There it was. Less than 48 hours after cutting me out of Christmas, she still saw me as their reliable handyman, their chauffeur, their fixer. "Why not take your Range Rover?" I asked mildly. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, Grandpa, you know the roads around the airport aren't great after snowstorms, and Ethan's taking the Audi to get last-minute supplies. Plus, honestly, you're so much better at navigating that mess. It's kind of your thing. My thing." For a moment, I pictured it. Me trudging through the airport crowds, hauling some wealthy family's designer luggage, waiting in the cold while they discussed wine pairings and golf trips. A 71-year-old servant in flannel. I smiled slowly, not that she could see it. "What time is their flight?" 2:30, Aspen County Airport. United, first class, of course. There'll be a baggage claim. "Oh, and Grandpa, could you wear that blue wool coat I bought you last year? They like people who look presentable." Her words hung there, a soft reminder of my supposed place. "Of course," I said evenly. "Leave it to me." She exhaled with relief. "You're the best, Grandpa. I knew I could count on you. See you tonight at the dinner rehearsal." I ended the call, placed the phone on the coffee table, and stared at the fire for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, I picked it back up, opened the settings, and switched the phone to Do Not Disturb. At 2:30 p.m., while the Prescott's flight touched down in Aspen, I was sitting in my armchair, feet up, sipping my second cup of coffee and working on the crossword puzzle in the Aspen Daily Chronicle. By 3:15, I imagined Lily pacing the arrivals curb, panic simmering just beneath her polished exterior. By 4 on, I figured the Prescotts were dragging their own luggage through the slush, wondering where their warm, curated welcome had gone. And by 5 hours, as the winter sun dipped behind the mountains, I roasted myself a chicken, turned off my phone entirely, and listened to the crackling fire while the outside world grew frantic. The first text came through when I briefly turned the phone back on around 6:30. Lily. "Grandpa, where are you?" Then another. "Ethan, this is unacceptable. Do you have any idea what you've done?" And then, "Noah, you left them at the airport. They're furious." I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and carved my chicken slowly, savoring the warm, golden meat and the sound of distant wind against the windows. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to save anyone. Around 8 p.m., headlights swept across my snowy driveway. A car door slammed. Then came the pounding, hard, angry fists on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I opened it to find Mr. and Mrs. Prescott on my porch, red-faced and fuming, with Lily and Ethan behind them. Their expensive coats were dusted with snow, their expressions a mixture of shock and fury. "Do you have any idea what kind of embarrassment this was?" Mr. Prescott barked, stepping into my entryway without invitation. "We waited over 2 hours at that miserable airport. 2 hours!" Lily's face was pale under the warm porch light. "Grandpa, why didn't you answer your phone?" I held the door open and met Mr. Prescott's glare with calm. "This is my home," I said evenly, "and you're not welcome inside." For a moment, nobody moved. Snow swirled in the air behind them. My voice had landed like a slap. "Tom," Lily whispered, stunned. "You heard me," I said, louder this time. "Out," Mr. Prescott blustered, sputtering threats about connections and reputation. Mrs. Prescott muttered something about how some people don't understand class. I stood in the doorway, unflinching, until they turned and stormed back through the snow, their luxury car tires spinning on my icy drive as they left. Lily stayed behind for half a second, looking at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Grandpa, what's gotten into you?" she said softly. I closed the door in her face. The lock clicked, sharp and final. 3 days later, I was sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd canceled the mortgage payments, enjoying a quiet morning with a fresh pot of coffee and a paper crossword, when I saw my own face staring back at me from the front page of the Aspen Chronicle. The headline read, "Local grandfather abandons elderly guests at Aspen Airport during holiday storm." My hands froze around the mug. There it was, in black and white, an old photo of me from a community fundraiser, back when I'd still believed in the goodness of people. Below it, a full column of sensational nonsense. Tom Whitaker, a longtime Aspen resident, left prominent guests Mr. and Mrs. Prescott stranded at Aspen-Pitkin County Airport during a major winter event, failing to arrive for a scheduled pickup. Witnesses say the elderly couple waited in dangerous temperatures for over 2 hours before arranging their own transportation. Dangerous temperatures. It had been 38 degrees and sunny. The article quoted the Prescotts at length. "We couldn't believe someone could be so heartless," Mr. Prescott was quoted. "It was humiliating. We were forced to fend for ourselves in dangerous conditions. It raises questions about Mr. Whitaker's stability." And there it was, the real knife. Stability. That one word, planted like a seed, designed to bloom into doubt in the minds of every neighbor and acquaintance who read it. They didn't just want to punish me for refusing to play chauffeur. They wanted to erase my reputation. I folded the paper carefully, set it aside, and stared out the window. The snow outside glittered in the morning light, the world looking deceptively calm while their attack moved through town like wildfire. Aspen wasn't a big city. Stories like this traveled fast, especially when they involved the Prescotts. They had deep pockets and louder voices. And my grandchildren? I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly how this had happened. Lily had always been close with the Society column editor. She'd grown up attending those same charity galas. All it would have taken was one dinner party complaint, a carefully phrased sob story, and voila, public humiliation, neatly gift-wrapped in newsprint. I sat there for a long moment, fingers tapping against the table, not with anger, but with the steady rhythm of a man who'd spent his life solving problems with a level head and a plan. They'd declared war, and I was done playing the role of the fool. I pulled my laptop closer and started digging. Aspen society wasn't nearly as impenetrable as it liked to think. Years of public records, property deeds, donation lists, and social media bragging were just sitting out there like a treasure chest waiting to be cracked open. First, the Prescotts. They were big fish in a small pond, old money with newer ambitions. Their investments, charity boards, golf club memberships, vacation properties, it was all there. Then I turned my focus to my grandkids. Lily's social media was a gold mine. Photos of her and her friends toasting champagne in the dining room I'd helped renovate. Ethan posting about his investment portfolio, which I'd quietly kept afloat during his bad bets. Noah tagging luxury ski trips funded by my generosity. They documented everything. Every luxury I'd paid for, every expense I'd covered, every moment they'd pretended was theirs alone. My desk slowly transformed into a war room. Bank statements stacked neatly on the left. Printed screenshots of their social media on the right. Highlighted mortgage records in the center. And the Aspen Chronicle article pinned at the top like a challenge. I opened a blank document and began to build a timeline. The year I refinanced my cabin to pay off their mortgage. The monthly transfers that bled my savings dry. The property tax bailouts. The temporary checks to cover luxury renovations. Line by line, the truth took shape. Cold, clear, undeniable. They thought they'd painted me as a bitter old man. What they didn't realize was that they'd handed me the paintbrush. I leaned back in my chair and glanced at the calendar on the wall. December 24th was circled in red, not for holiday cheer, but because that's the night their grand Christmas dinner would be held. Lily's winter gala, as she liked to call it. Invitations had gone out weeks ago. Local influencers, wealthy families, business partners, all the people they wanted to impress. Perfect audience, perfect stage. I closed the laptop slowly. For years, I'd been the quiet benefactor, the invisible man behind their success. But this year, the curtain was going to rise. And everyone was going to see the truth. The days leading up to Christmas Eve passed like the calm before a blizzard. Outside, Aspen was dressed for the season. Streets lined with glowing garlands, wreaths on every storefront. Tourists wrapped in expensive ski gear, wandering between chocolate shops and après-ski lounges. But inside my cabin, things were different. Quiet, focused, surgical. I spent those days turning decades of sacrifice into something tangible. Evidence. On my kitchen table, I laid everything out like I was preparing for trial. Stacks of bank statements, each one showing those automatic mortgage transfers I'd made every 15th of the month. Property tax receipts, utility bills I'd paid without a word. Home renovation invoices with my signature scrawled at the bottom. Then came the social media posts. I'd printed them in color on heavy paper, so nobody could accuse me of misunderstanding context. There was Lily posing beside the marble kitchen island, captioned, "Couldn't have done it without hard work." There was Ethan on a ski lift in Switzerland, tagged Orsch von Blessed Norrstor Success, Mindset. During the exact same month, I'd paid their property insurance. Noah with his friends in a rooftop bar, raising glasses over a caption that read, "Living the Dream." My highlighter moved methodically, marking dates and dollar amounts. Every line told a story of my silence, their entitlement, and the slow erosion of respect. When the stack of documents was finally complete, I counted out 12 identical sets, one for each guest invited to their Aspen Christmas dinner. Lily had posted the guest list weeks earlier like she was curating an art exhibition. Old Aspen families, the Prescott's friends, Ethan's business contacts, a couple of charity board members. People who adored gossip almost as much as they loved Chardonnay. I tucked each packet into a crisp white folder and sealed them with brass fasteners. Simple, elegant, impossible to ignore. Then I sat down and rehearsed what I was going to say. Not a long speech, just the truth, cold and clean. I'd spent years holding my tongue. This time, I'd let the facts speak louder than my voice ever could. On the morning of December 24th, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual flannel and boots, but in the navy wool suit I'd worn to Helen's funeral. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, clean shave. The man in the mirror wasn't the tired grandfather who'd been left out in the cold. He looked like someone they used to respect, before money blurred the lines. I loaded the evidence folders into my briefcase, the one I'd used back when I ran the contracting business. It felt heavier than paper should, maybe because it carried years of betrayal along with it. As the sun began to set, Aspen transformed. Snow fell in slow, glittering flakes, catching the light from the mansions perched on the hills. Their house was one of the brightest, Christmas lights draped across the roofline, music drifting faintly through the open windows. Cars lined the long driveway. I parked down the hill, out of sight. It was 6:42 p.m., late enough that everyone would be seated, early enough that nobody could make a graceful escape. I walked up the shoveled path slowly, boots crunching in rhythm with my heartbeat. The front door was unlocked, of course. Lily liked to brag about how safe the neighborhood was. I stepped inside. The heat, the scent of rosemary and prime rib, and the low hum of elegant conversation washed over me. For a moment, the scene looked almost like the holidays I used to know, except for the fact that I wasn't supposed to be part of it. I moved down the hallway toward the dining room. Through the doorway, I saw them, Lily at the head of the table, wine glass poised, Ethan making some exaggerated story, Noah laughing too loudly, and 12 well-dressed guests arranged around the table, plates gleaming in the candlelight. When I stepped into the room, everything froze. 12 faces turned. Lily's smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. "Grandpa?" she whispered, the stem of her glass trembling. "What are you doing here?" I set the briefcase down on their marble sideboard with a quiet, deliberate click. "Good evening, everyone," I said evenly. "I hope you don't mind a little surprise for Christmas." The room went dead silent. Forks hovered mid-air. 12 well-dressed guests sat frozen, as if someone had cut the power and sound all at once. The only noise was the faint crackle from the fireplace at the far end of the room, and the distant whistle of wind curling through the mountain pines. Lily rose slowly, her chair scraping the hard wood with a sharp, nervous screech. "Grandpa," she said, voice wobbling, This is a private dinner." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I know, and I'm family. At least, I thought I was. I won't be long. I brought a few things I think everyone here deserves to see." I popped open the brass clasps on my briefcase. The sound echoed in the stillness like a gavel striking wood. I pulled out the first folder and slid it down the table to a woman in pearls seated nearest me. Her manicured hands hesitated before picking it up. Then another folder, and another. 12 in total, handed out one by one. By the time the last folder reached the end of the table, the sound of pages rustling filled the room, a soft, rising chorus of confusion. Inside each folder was the same story. Years of bank statements, highlighting the mortgage payments I'd been making for their home. Tax receipts, utility bills, screenshots of social media posts showing luxury trips, designer upgrades, new vehicles, all during the months I'd been quietly footing their bills. The woman in pearls frowned. "Is this real?" she whispered, scanning a highlighted line that showed a $2,600 transfer every month for 6 years. Ethan shot to his feet, face flushing red. "Grandpa, what is this? You can't just—" "Sit down," I said softly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that stops men in their tracks. He froze. Slowly, awkwardly, he sat. I reached into the briefcase again and pulled out the Aspen Chronicle article, holding it up like Exhibit A. 3 days ago, I opened my paper to find myself called unstable, dangerous, heartless. According to this article, I left a helpless elderly couple stranded during a holiday storm. I placed a copy in front of each guest. The truth? It was 38 degrees and sunny. I chose to spend that afternoon at home for the first time in years, instead of being their unpaid driver. Across the table, Mr. Prescott stiffened. His wife looked away, cheeks flushing pink. I gestured toward Lily and the boys. "These are my grandchildren. I raised them after their parents passed. I refinanced my home to keep their house. I sent money every month without fail. And this year, for the first time, I was told I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because I didn't fit the atmosphere." A murmur ran around the table. People shifted in their seats, eyes flicking between the documents and the hosts like spectators at a tennis match. "Grandpa, stop," Lily whispered, panic flickering in her eyes. This is," I interrupted. "This is exactly what it looks like. You took and took and took. And the moment I stopped, you turned me into the villain. You planted this story to protect your image." Mr. Prescott cleared his throat. "This is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time," I said evenly, "because everyone at this table knows how fast a story spreads in Aspen. But tonight, they'll hear my story too." The woman in pearls leaned toward Lily. "You told me this house was paid for through your startup success," she said, voice cold. A man in a gray suit flipped through the statements. "This is hundreds of thousands of dollars," he muttered. "All from him?" Lily's carefully curated façade was cracking. "It's complicated," she stammered. "He offered—" "I sacrificed," I cut in, "for years, without asking for thanks, and you repaid it by erasing me." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. I closed my briefcase, straightened my jacket, and looked around the table one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," I said calmly. "It's the last one I'll ever pay for." Then I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, the eruption began, voices overlapping, questions flying, guests demanding explanations. The brittle social shell they had built cracked wide open, and the sound of it was the sweetest Christmas music I'd ever heard. Gossip in Aspen moves faster than a snowslide on a warm afternoon. By Christmas morning, the dinner table explosion had already become the Valley's favorite story. I didn't need to be there to witness it. Aspen has its ways: coffee shop murmurs, slopeside chatter, text chains between charity board members. One person whispers, 3 people embellish, 10 people pass it along like a vintage bottle of wine. By noon, Everyone in their circle knew that Lily's self-made success was built on the back of her grandfather's checkbook. I spent that morning exactly how I wanted: fire crackling, snow drifting outside, bacon sizzling on the stove. For the first time in decades, Christmas was quiet. No frantic phone calls, no errands, no forced smiles, just peace. My phone buzzed nonstop on the kitchen counter, lighting up with messages I didn't bother to read, a mix of angry, apologetic, desperate. I let them pile up like junk mail. By late afternoon, I finally turned the ringer back on. The first call was from Ethan. He didn't waste time on greetings. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snapped. "The Prescotts left early. Mrs. Kramer pulled out of her donation to the foundation. Uncle Mitch won't return our calls." "This is a disaster." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Sounds like people finally learned where their money came from." "You humiliated us," he hissed, "in front of everyone." "No, Ethan," I said, voice calm. "I just held up a mirror." He tried a few more lines: guilt, manipulation, panic, but it all bounced off. I'd spent too many years flinching. This time, I simply hung up. The next call came from Lily. Unlike Ethan, her voice was brittle, like something that had cracked overnight. "Grandpa," she said softly, "they're talking about us everywhere. People canceled plans. Some of our friends won't answer messages. You've ruined our reputation." I leaned back in my chair, watching snow swirl outside my cabin window. "No, Lily, you did that when you decided I wasn't good enough to sit at your table." She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, there was a tremor I hadn't heard before. "We didn't think you'd ever fight back." There it was, the truth behind all their arrogance. I'd been the silent foundation for so long that they thought I'd stay that way forever. "I know," I said. "That's why it worked." The days that followed were like watching cracks spread across lake ice, slowly at first, then fast. The Prescotts, furious about their public embarrassment, withdrew their financial support from Ethan's venture. Several donors followed suit. Lily's carefully curated social media presence went eerily quiet. A few Aspen influencers posted cryptic stories about truth coming to light. People who once lined up to dine in their home started finding excuses to stay away. Meanwhile, I shoveled snow from my porch and bought myself a decent set of groceries for the first time in years. I even replaced the flickering porch light. Simple things. Mine. One evening, as I was stacking firewood, my neighbor June stopped by. She's lived down the road for 30 years, never missed a piece of valley gossip. She leaned on her shovel and gave me a knowing grin. "Tom," she said, "I heard you gave quite the Christmas performance." I chuckled. "I just told the truth." She laughed. "Well, you've turned Aspen upside down. People are still talking." I watched the snow fall into the quiet forest, my breath clouding in the cold. For once, I didn't feel like the invisible man. I felt like someone who'd finally stood up, and the avalanche was only beginning to roll downhill. By mid-March, the winter snow in Aspen had begun to melt, revealing the muddy ground underneath, ugly, uneven, real, and just like the thaw, the perfect image my grandchildren had built was unraveling layer by layer. The first sign came in the form of a thick envelope that showed up in my mailbox one Tuesday morning. Official. Stamped. I recognized the return address immediately. Their mortgage lender. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. Notice of default. I sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from my coffee, and slit the envelope open with the same steady hand I'd used when I canceled the payments months earlier. Inside, the letter confirmed what I'd expected. 3 months of missed mortgage payments, past due property taxes, and a 14-day ultimatum before the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings on their Red Mountain house. The sum? $8,200 in arrears. Chump change compared to the years I'd covered without question. But to them, it was an avalanche they couldn't outrun. For weeks, the calls had been piling up. Ethan's frantic rants, Lily's brittle apologies, Noah's confused attempts to just talk. I'd ignored them all. But that night, something changed. Just after sunset, I heard the crunch of tires on my snowy driveway. I looked through the window and saw a black sedan pulling up. Ethan's, or at least it had been. The The paint was dulled, the windshield dirty. He climbed out slowly, shoulders hunched, wearing a wrinkled coat. He looked older, humbled. He knocked on my door, not pounding this time. Just a few soft knocks, like someone approaching a stranger's house. I opened it. "Evening, Ethan." He hesitated on the threshold, glancing around my cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. Fresh paint on the walls, new armchair, the porch light fixed, small, quiet improvements I'd made after I stopped draining myself for them. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice lacked the sharpness it used to carry. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat on the edge of my couch, hands clasped tightly. For the first time since he was a kid, he didn't try to take up space. "I guess you heard about the house," he said. I leaned against the mantel. "I got the letter this morning," he exhaled shakily. "We can't make the payments without you." Everything started falling apart. The Prescotts backed out of my investment deal. 2 donors followed. Lily's friends stopped showing up. We've tried renting out the guest house, but it barely covers utilities. We're out of time, Grandpa. I let the silence stretch. He was waiting for the old me, the man who would jump in, fix everything, mortgage his future for their mistakes. But that man was gone. "Do you know how much money I sent over the years?" I asked. He nodded weakly. Lily calculated it after Christmas, 200 and something. $239,612, I corrected. "I know every penny now. I finally sat down and added it up." His shoulders sagged. "I don't have the right to ask, but is there any chance you'd help us? Just enough to stop the foreclosure? We can figure the rest out later." I studied him. This wasn't the cocky man who'd once smirked at my worn boots while bragging about networking in Vail. This was someone staring down real consequences for the first time in his life. "No," I said simply. His head jerked up. "Grandpa?" "No," I repeated. "That house isn't my responsibility. I paid for it for years, and you all treated me like I was lucky to be included. You chose their approval over family. Now, you live with that choice." The words hung between us like cold air. He swallowed hard, blinking back something he didn't want me to see. "I lost you, didn't I?" he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No, Ethan. You gave me away." He sat there for a long time, staring at the floor, before finally standing. "I deserve that," he said quietly. "All of it." As he reached the door, he paused. "I didn't say this before, but at Christmas, when you walked in like that, calm, collected, I was proud, angry, embarrassed, but proud. I didn't answer. I didn't need to." He left into the cold night, headlights disappearing down the hill. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the dark road. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one cleaning up their mess. And strangely enough, it felt good. Spring settled over Aspen slowly, like a cautious guest testing the temperature before stepping inside. The snow retreated into the high peaks, the roads cleared, and the wealthy visitors packed up their fur coats and returned to their city lives. The valley grew quieter. That's when the letter came. It was hand-delivered by courier, thick and heavy. A formal foreclosure notice for the Red Mountain House. I didn't feel the shock most people would. There had been no miracle investors, no last-minute saviors, just numbers. Cold, immovable numbers they could no longer ignore. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign went up on the manicured lawn I'd paid to keep green for years. Neighbors whispered, some avoided eye contact. A few, like my neighbor June, gave me knowing looks as if they'd been waiting for this ending all along. Lily tried to keep up appearances for a while. She hosted one last charity luncheon, hoping to rally support. But the guests were fewer, the chatter thinner. People remembered the Christmas dinner. They remembered the folders. And Aspen's elite have short attention spans for anyone who stops looking flawless. Ethan moved out first, heading for Denver to take a job he once would have called beneath him. Noah followed not long after, crashing with friends, then disappearing from social media altogether. Lily held on until the very end, stubborn, proud, trying to negotiate with banks she once ignored. But eventually, even she packed her designer luggage and left the house on the hill behind. And me? I didn't buy the house. I didn't bail them out. I didn't even show up at the auction. That chapter was closed. My cabin became more than just a quiet refuge. It became home again. Real home. I painted the walls a warm cedar brown, repaired the roof I'd neglected for years, upgraded my ancient kitchen appliances, planted new wildflowers along the porch in early summer, just like Helen used to do. The strange thing about taking your life back is how much space opens up when guilt isn't eating every inch of it. I started spending time with people who didn't expect me to fund their existence. June invited me to community potlucks. The couple down the road asked me to help build a shed and insisted on paying me fairly. I reconnected with old friends I'd pushed aside while being available for every family whim. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. By the time December rolled around again, the mountains were blanketed in snow, and the lights of Aspen twinkled below like a scattered jewelry box. One evening, as I was stacking firewood, June knocked on my door holding a box of cookies. "A few of us are having Christmas dinner down at the community center," she said. "Nothing fancy, good food, real company. You coming?" I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. The dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, laughter echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Kids ran between tables. Seniors told old ski lodge stories. Nobody cared about designer clothes or curated atmospheres. When they asked about my family, I told the story with a dry humor that made people chuckle and shake their heads. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was free. As midnight approached, snow began to fall again, the soft, thick kind that silences the world. I stepped outside for a breath of cold air and found myself alone on the steps, looking up at the falling flakes. That's when headlights appeared at the end of the road, a single car, cautiously making its way toward the community center. I didn't need to guess. It was Lily's. She got out slowly, bundled in a coat that wasn't designer anymore, her hair tied back simply. No entourage, no polished speech, just her. She walked toward me through the snow, hesitating a few feet away. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. Her voice didn't have its usual performance edge. "Hi, Lily." She glanced at the warm lights glowing behind me. "I wasn't invited anywhere this year," she admitted. "I heard you were here. I just wanted to see you." For a long moment, we stood in silence, snowflakes collecting on our shoulders. I thought about everything, about that night in their mansion, about the article, about the years of being used like a silent foundation. But I also thought about raising them after their parents died, about the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the Christmas mornings when their joy had been real and uncalculated. I stepped aside. "Come in, there's food." Her eyes widened, then softened with something I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude, maybe? She followed me inside, where the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon greeted us like an old friend. People welcomed her warmly, not knowing or caring about her last name's fall from grace. We didn't talk about money, or the house, or the Christmas that shattered everything. We just ate together at a crowded table under strings of handmade paper stars, surrounded by people who valued kindness over appearances. That night, when I returned to my cabin, the snow was still falling, blanketing the world in quiet. I poured myself a glass of good whiskey, sat by the fire, and looked at Helen's photo on the mantel. For the first time in many years, I felt like she'd approve. I'd lost the illusion of family, yes, but in doing so, I'd built something better, a life that was mine again, built on respect, truth, and peace. Christmas used to be a performance. Now it was real, and that, I thought as the fire popped softly, was the best revenge of all.